Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools, and much more.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast for sustainable procurement. I'm Sean McCarthy, Director of Action Sustainability Community Interest Company, and I'm delighted today to introduce Vaishali Baid, who's a colleague of mine at Action Sustainability and has a very interesting story to tell. Hello, Vaishali.
Hi, Sean. Good morning. A little bit about me. I'm Vaishali Baid. I work with Action Sustainability. I'm social value lead and senior consultant for sustainable procurement with Action Sustainability. And just going back to my work experience, I used to work mostly with Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies in the core procurement areas. And how my sustainability journey started, I remember it was 10 or 12 years ago when I was doing some audits in different countries, and one of the senior management team member, he asked me, Vishali, are you considering non-financial factors within your audit side of things? Are you looking at sustainability? And that was the time I remember I started looking in my Oxford dictionary, started looking at the sustainable meaning that time 12 years ago, and it was all about the long term benefits. That was the definition in the dictionary that time. But what really happened, it struck a chord with me that this is something I need to really look into. I need to think about how it really play a kind of a role within procurement and supply chain. And I think that was the start of my journey looking at sustainability within procurement and supply chain. So I think my international experience specifically, because I worked in 3 countries now, coupled with my work experience at various diverse international organization, it has shaped my sustainable approach to procurement and category management. So I think it has been a wonderful journey so far, and I'm really happy to work with various clients looking at sustainability, social value within their procurement and supply chain.
Yeah, thanks for Charlie. We speak to so many people around the world that have had that sort of light bulb moment of, do you know what? There's more to there's more to life than savings and cost and value and net present value and all of those things. So it's really interesting and very refreshing to hear that you kind of got the sustainability bug fairly early on in your career. So when we talk about, I always describe it as sort of acronym soup. When we talk about, CSR and ESG and social value, sustainable procurement and all of those things, how do you see those concepts? How do you see them working in a practical sense through procurement?
So, Sean, I think it's a quite relevant question. And the way I see it, most of our clients, they are in the same situation. When they approach us, they are like, Vishali, we need to work around social value. We need to work around sustainable procurement. And the new topic or a hot topic in our industry is ESG right now. So again, the way I see all these topics coming together from my experiences, when I started, it was all about, non-financial factors. Anything that is not related to profits and margins in an organization, we are talking about those non-financial factors. But the way I've seen these concepts getting involved and, evolved within industries, it's mostly based on which sectors we are serving. So for some industries, some sectors, social value is quite important, like construction industry. But when we are talking about healthcare or say pharmaceutical industries, it's more around ESG and sustainability practices. Why? Because they are mostly privately owned, they have private investors, asset managers, and so on. So they are looking at these concepts more from investor lens. They are looking at these concepts, who can report on these and who can measure these kind of thing. So overall, it should not matter whatever terms we are using in reality, but what goes behind it, how we are working around achieving those non-financial factors, that should matter to our industry. So I think we all are in this soup together, and it should not matter overall that what terms we are using.
So if we look at, I mean, the two terms that you kind of pulled out, social value and ESG, is there any difference? Are they the same thing, or is it just a kind of nuanced difference between the two?
There are certain differences because, of course, when we are looking at ESG framework, it's about, environmental, social, and governance side of things, right? So social is one of the pillars of this ESG metrics overall. So in a way, if you are working around social value, and Sean, I mean, with my work experience working with industries on so on with social value, we know social value, we are looking at local communities, what we are doing for our supply chain, what we are even doing for our employees. So it's that positive part. It's all about people overall within social value. So it is a kind of a part of ESG for sure. But is it the complete picture? Maybe not, because we need to look around the environmental side and governance side as well when it comes to ESG. But again, from my experience, what is the kind of a critical difference over here is social value is the delivery part of supply chain. We are talking about how we can deliver those, positive impacts, how we can understand the social issues and challenges. But ESG is more kind of a compliance driven approach, that we have some standardized metrics in place, and we are just reporting on those kind of things. So there is a kind of a subtle difference, because ESG, we are touching on the reporting side, but social value is we are creating that positive impact. And it's not just based on, those standardized KPIs and metrics. It's about understanding what are the challenges of my community, my people, and my supply chain, and then working a kind of a solution around that.
Yeah, thanks, Vaishali. I mean, I know that you talk about the S of ESG, and we've already kind of touched on the fact that it is very kind of specific around communities that you're working in. Would you like to expand on that a little and maybe give us some examples?
That is interesting because when we talk about as part of ESG, there are four aspects that we are covering overall. One, local community, which we are trying to cover within our social value side of things as well. But we also cover what we are doing for our supply chain, then what we are doing for our employees and customers. So the way I try to, explain this as part of ESG, which is quite complex in itself, it's about looking at that 360-degree approach towards people, right? Who are your stakeholders within your business? It is your people, so you have a responsibility what you are doing from, say, diversity side of things, how you are giving them a healthy and a safer place to work. When you look at supply chain, what you are doing for your suppliers, if you're dealing more with, say, SMEs, VCSEs, how you are giving them, say, better payment terms and so on, and what you are again doing for your customers and, your local communities. And again, Sean, taking our conversation around local communities, I'm just trying to look at social value and ESG together, and the missing element that we have seen through our work experiences. And I can give you, of course, a couple of examples over here. We think about local community a lot when we are working around our social value projects and ESG, and that is an important part. But the biggest missing element is we think about what is social value for me as a client. We think about what is social value for suppliers, but then we miss what my local communities really want. We might be, say, working on apprentice opportunities or, upskilling people in local communities, but we forget, is it something that those local communities really need? It might be they need greener spaces, they need more schools and opportunities over there. So we really need to think about social value and ESG by understanding what people really want. And the point I'm trying to make here is, if you're working around the S part of ESG or social value, you need to first understand the requirements, the issues and challenges of our people, and then put a strategy. Not that you are having a strategy and you're working around it. So it's like a vice versa kind of an approach over here.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that's kind of very different to some of the more technical environmental topics, So everybody talks about climate change and we talk about carbon reduction and all of those things. And there are kind of some quite scientifically well proven methods to reduce carbon. But actually, as you say, social value is very different for different communities. As you said, Vaishali, you've got a lot of international experience. How does social value vary in different parts of the world?
That's an interesting question. The way I've seen social value evolving over time is when I used to work in India, we used to have CSR as kind of a mandate in India, which is around corporate social responsibility. And it was a simple way of looking what you are doing for local communities, that if you are working in a particular sector, you are making a profit over and above the threshold that is provided by the government, you need to provide 2% of your profit around the CSR activities. That was a kind of a mandate and still going on in India. And if I look around that concept of CSR in India, it is all around social value, right? You are investing 2% of your profit in local communities around the issues, challenges, which is mostly, from an Indian perspective, it is more around healthcare and education. So the companies used to invest that 2% profit around projects in local communities. So I think there we are working around social value. But when I see the practices, when I used to work in Germany, it was also around CSR. But the way they need to look around CSR was quite different because of historical reasons, especially in Western European countries and specifically Germany. I've seen a different side of CSR and social value. It was more around, of course, after World War II, there was a requirement to upskill people and create those kind of opportunities in local areas. So the big organizations in Germany, they have invested a lot in local communities around education, around providing them kind of vocational trainings, that how they can upskill themselves, how they can work with these companies later on. So that approach was more from a historical reason, what are the requirements and so on. And similarly, in the UK, we talk a lot about social value, and that is a good start around, looking at the positive impact. And if you look around PPNO 620 and the timing of PPNO 620, it was, during that COVID era. We released this PPNO 20 in, of course, 2020. It was implemented from January 2021. It was that kind of an era where we need to think about our local communities because there were challenges, there were issues, and it was more around how we can use our public spend in a better way, how we can uplift our societies and communities, using that public spend. So again, the way we need to look around social value and CSR concepts is what is the challenge? What is the issues that we are trying to solve here? And then think about, do we really need a policy over here, or do we need to revisit and change the policy? Because the way I see, again from my experience, PPNO 620 is a fantastic tool. It has everything that we can work around social value, but it's time we need to update that policy. Because when I was just thinking of PPNO 620, it's been 5 years, right? It will be 5 years that we have passed that COVID era and everything. So it's time we need to revisit that policy, change the theme of COVID-19 recovery, think about certain things that are more appropriate in today's world, right? So because of course we are of course thinking about communities, but we need to think about our supply chains as well, because our organizations, they are going through a kind of a change over here. And with the supply issues, to be honest, just touching on the supply chain work we are doing, we are going through geopolitical situations, we live in a complex supply chain. So it's time we need to revisit these policies and make it quite appropriate for today rather than what we were already doing in last 5 years.
Yeah, thanks, Vaishali. For our international audience, could you explain a little bit more about what PPNO 620 is, what it does, and a little bit more on how effective it is?
Yeah, I think the good thing about social value PPNO 620 is there is no defined way of looking at social value. And that's the beauty of it, because what they are saying, you need to think about people whenever you are working on any projects, specifically for in scope organizations. And what PPNO 620 covers is it covers, of course, COVID 19 recovery. It covers fighting climate change, inequalities in our industry, and well being of our people. So, again, if you will see the framework of PPNO 620, it's quite broad. It covers everything that can impact our people within our supply chain, within our local communities. So, PPNO 620 serves as a framework where, any industry, to be honest, be it in scope organizations, be it private organizations, anyone, they can pick and choose what is really relevant for that sector and they can start working around it. And I think what social value is doing really well in the UK is it's able to generate that kind of a thought process that we need to look for our people. We need to think about our people when it comes to our projects and supply chain practices, because Sean, the way you have already mentioned that uh, we like it or not, we always think about environment, which is all good. We need to think about our environment, but we need to also think about our people when it comes to our supply chain, our organizations. Think about if we are not thinking about people, we will have more sickness leave in our organization. Our supply chain, if they are not financially well-being or well-to-do, they will not be able to supply material and so on. So, social value is quite important. It should be the crux of any organization trying to work around their ESG or sustainability strategy. So, I think social value is quite important when we are looking at these factors.
So that's interesting. So you're saying PPNO 620, I mean, it's for the UK, it's mandatory for the UK public sector, and the public sector is required to put a percentage valuation in their scorecards. Is that right?
Yes. So from PPNO 620 perspective, we need to put minimum 10% weightage on social value. But again, we have seen really great practices from certain local councils and companies. They are putting 20%. Even we have seen 35% weightage around social value.
And that starts to make a difference to the supply chain. That really does influence procurement decisions.
Absolutely. From a communication perspective, from a better influence on our supply chain, it is making a difference. But the gap that we are still working around, because it's a journey, right? That how should we measure? How should we report social value? And the problem, of course, as I said, it's a journey around social value. The problem we see with the current social value ways of doing things, it's kind of a short term practices that we are looking within our projects, because if a contract or a framework is for 2 years or 5 years, we are just thinking about 2 years or 5 years. We are not thinking what will happen beyond that. Should we ask those organizations, suppliers, to continue their social value work in those locations or so? So what will happen? We don't have an answer over here. So I think we as organizations, we really need to think about what after our contracts end, how the suppliers will be able to work and put that legacy kind of work in those local communities.
Yeah, thanks, Vaishali. I guess when I look at PPNO 620 and the way that it's being implemented through the public sector, it's terribly British. And I guess because it was obviously something for the British government, it was really intended for local suppliers in the UK. And it talks about apprenticeships and it talks about, all of those things that we should be doing in the UK. But I guess my take on it would be for a public body that's necessarily procuring outside the UK, it's a bit different, isn't it? And is that one of the things that needs to be addressed when you're saying it needs revision now? Does it really, whether the UK government likes it or not, the public sector sometimes has to buy from international suppliers. Does it really work when you start to procure outside the UK?
Now, Sean, you are touching that kind of a war zone within social value, and it's quite right. Again, when we work with clients, and I've seen a lot of examples in practice that you rightly mentioned, social value is quite apt when we are looking at local suppliers and local supply chain. So for me, social value really works when it comes to service contracts, because when we are looking at those service kind of contracts, it's more local in nature. We are mostly using our local services from within 10 miles, 15 miles where we are living or where we are working. But when it comes to goods, it is a kind of a question mark. That's the way I can put it, because I'm just putting an example. And I know a lot of industries, they are buying from different countries. And it's not that they don't want to buy locally, but we need to first accept there are certain things we can't get in, Britain, for example. Because just for example, cotton can't be grown here because of, weather conditions and so on. So we like it or not, we need to buy from certain other countries. And that's okay, we need to accept it. We need to find solutions around offsetting those kind of carbon emissions getting caught in the country and so on. But what we really need to think about when it comes to social value is, one, do we have transparency? First, do we know our supply chain better? Because again, I can give you a whole lot of examples working in manufacturing and healthcare. When I ask category managers and commodity managers, do you know where your suppliers are sitting? They are like, yes, Vishali, I know where my suppliers are sitting. But the piece they are missing is they know where their first tier suppliers are sitting, which is mostly in the UK, yes, or they might have a representative office in the UK. But when you go deep inside where their second tier suppliers, contractors are sitting, where the manufacturing is happening, they might assemble a couple of things in the UK and they will provide you that kind of a solution. But when we see where the raw materials are coming, where the commodities are coming from different parts of the world, that is the missing piece. And in those situations, if I need to think about social value, it is not social value the way we see it in the UK through PPN, but for me, it is more around social sustainability, right? That what we are doing for complex supply chains. Are we looking at, do they have, right to work? Do they have, do they have modern slavery, human right issues? So it becomes much more broader topic rather than just looking at social value from the complexity of supply chains.
Okay, so Vishali, when we talk about the S of ESG, what are the significant factors for you in a procurement sense? How does that work?
Okay, so now this is where the whole story starts. And before I talk about the S part of ESG for sustainable procurement, I would like to quote some facts here, Sean, from a survey that was done by EcoVadis. And what they did, they asked close to 500 procurement team members that what are the most significant issues which they would like to address within sustainable procurement in next 2 or 3 years. And if I just go through those facts and figures, you will see the number one driver about looking at ESG within sustainable procurement is social and supplier workforce practices, which again comes within the S pillar of ESG. The second one is of course net zero and scope 3. I think we are doing well over here, but there is a gap. The way I see net zero and scope 3, great strategies, great implementation plans, but we are just 20, 30 days away from 2030, right? But still we are not there where we would like to reach. So again, there is a gap over here, but this is not so much related with this part. And even the other survey results, it talks about ethical business practices, non-carbon environmental impact, which is more around people and society, circularity and supplier diversity. So the point I'm trying to make here is the six drivers around ESG for sustainable procurement. Out of these six drivers, 4 to 5 drivers are around the S pillar. And I think we like it or not, the organizations, they really need to work around this social part, so that it should not be a case that in next couple of years we see new legislation and regulations, they are coming around as part of ESG and we have not reached anywhere. So it's always better to start early than looking at what things are changing, what regulations will be there around as part of ESG. So yes, I think that is my tip as well for the organizations. Start looking at the S part of ESG if you really want sustainable procurement to work for your organizations.
That's amazing. So carbon came second.
Yes.
That's quite astonishing. I wonder if it's because maybe people think carbon is sort of done, which it clearly isn't. And the other thing that I find very interesting when you talked about the need for transparency and to understand the supply chain beyond tier one, you have to do that to get to your scope 3 emissions. So there's a kind of a synergy, isn't there, between the carbon agenda and the social agenda. We all need to understand our supply chains in a better way. And in some sectors, we do, and in other sectors, we're still on the journey, shall we say.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And maybe just quoting a work that we are doing with a Dutch institute over here around, carbon ladder. What we have seen, it's easier to reach your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, where most of the companies and organizations, they do have a target to reach to reduce their scope 1 and 2 by say 2030 or 35, which is quite achievable. But when it comes to scope 3, as you rightly mentioned, one, we don't have transparency around, within our supply chain. And second, we don't have a right strategy for scope 3, because we need to talk to suppliers. Again, I'm, quoting what we need to do, how we can influence our suppliers, because scope 3 is mostly within our supply chain through our suppliers. So we need to think about how we can make suppliers our partners in a way to work this scope 3 strategy. So I think, yes, there are right strategies in place, but when it comes to implementation around scope 3, we really need to collaborate better.
Which is, a parallel with the social value agenda as well. So that the two things go together, don't they?
Yes, yeah, because within social value, we are also talking about fighting climate change. And one of the good examples, if I can quote here, is from NHS. They have, taken social value really seriously, which is, a great start for a healthcare system. And what they have done differently, which I think it's quite working well, within their social value framework for NHS, they have made fighting climate change as a kind of a mandatory theme over there. So you can work around other social value topics, which are, based on your sector, based on what kind of impact you can make. Because think about NHS and healthcare system. They are buying medical things, they are buying non-medical stuff as well. So the impacts are quite different. You can't supervise them to work around the only certain themes. So they have kept it open, but what they have made a kind of a mandate is fighting climate change. So irrespective which categories you are serving, from where you are getting the material and so on, but you really need to work around fighting climate change and providing your CRP, which is carbon reduction plan. So I think
You
this
have to do the
way of,
carbon piece, so then
yes,
you
they
can
have
choose
to. Yeah.
other themes around social value. Yeah.
Yes. Because they have a kind of a supplier roadmap in place that every year they are trying to reach certain milestones. And it is really working in a good way, because we can't just have targets. Let's agree. I can't put a target by 2050, I would like to reach here. We need to put those kind of small milestones that every year where we would like to progress and how much we are doing in that way. So yes.
Yeah, thank you. We've kind of touched on it already, but a lot of people, we do a lot of these podcasts with different people around the world, and a lot of them, like yourself, are procurement people that have kind of got the sustainability bug. I always say it's a really good time to be in procurement right now, because procurement has potentially a lot of power to do good. How do you see, coming from a procurement background like yourself, how do you see the role in procurement making a difference and changing in the next few years?
That's again an interesting question, and it's more like a personal perspective over here, Sean. I think why I started working in procurement. So the story starts from there because I really felt at that time, I'm talking about 15 years, 14 years ago, for me, procurement was in a place where we can, have a great influence on suppliers because we used to be directly contacting the suppliers, be it strategic suppliers, key suppliers, or whatever suppliers we are dealing with. And then we have a kind of an interaction with internal key stakeholders, be it CFOs and CTOs of the world. So I really see procurement in a way that we can have a greater influence on internal and external stakeholders. And I see, if you ask me 3 years down the line, I think procurement has all the kind of powers in the world, but it all depends how much we are using the power. Having a magic wand is important, but how we use that magic wand, that's the question we need to solve. And I think procurement can really influence suppliers. And I'm just touching on my doctorate, which I'm doing currently in sustainable procurement. And the way I see how we can influence supply chain is through suppliers, because again, from practice, from my doctorate journey, I've really seen companies having the best strategies in place, having sustainable procurement in place, but what they are missing is the implementation part. And first thing, they need to accept they can't implement everything on their own, right? You need a partner, you need to collaborate with your suppliers better. So the agenda for companies should be how they can have a better co-creation opportunities with suppliers, with their first tier suppliers, and make them a key influencers for their supply chain. And let's agree, big organizations with complex supply chains, they can't reach out to their second tier suppliers or, third tier suppliers, but they can make first tier suppliers a kind of a route to actually reach out to second tier and third tier suppliers. So again, procurement for me, what they need to really work around is one, to collaborate better with their suppliers and collaborate better with their internal audience as well.
So this is more about working with tier ones in partnership, I guess, and in the longer term, this sort of collaborative approach to procurement going forward.
Yes, absolutely. I think that would be a key over here.
Yeah, because I started in procurement in the 80s, and there's nothing like that. So it has actually changed quite a lot over the years. No, that's great, Vaishali. Thank you. If I can maybe ask a final question, which I always ask of people when we're on these podcasts. A lot of our audience around the world are people that are quite new to sustainable procurement, and there's quite a lot of people out there that have kind of been told, because it's a thing now. So, oh, you're doing sustainable procurement. What would your advice be to somebody starting off in their career journey and wanted to get into sustainable procurement? What would what would Vishali advise them?
So thank you so much, Sean, for this question. And I think for someone within procurement who is starting to, look around sustainable procurement as a career opportunity, or just trying to look around sustainable procurement within their organization, I think what is important is to start small, because it's a journey. That's what I always tell to my clients as well. If you are in sustainable procurement, don't think, in the first few days you will just, move the tables and you will bring some kind of a magic over there. No, that might not be possible. So start small, start looking at, low hanging fruits within procurement, because the way I see right now sustainable procurement being seen is it's more from a compliance lens, which is right at a point, but then we need to think about those small actions that we can bring within the procurement journey, be it sourcing management, be it category management. So I think that is the first piece of advice for me. The second thing, which is quite critical, which has helped me a lot, it's around upskilling yourself. Don't think you are an expert, because from my 15 years of experience, I never say I'm an expert in, social value or sustainable procurement. It's all about learning, because it's all about maximizing the benefits of sustainability and social value. And I don't think any one of us we have seen what is the maximum or how the maturity looks within sustainable procurement. So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep thinking about certain ideas that you can implement, because putting a strategy is important. But again, I'm saying as procurement professionals, we have that kind of a power with us that we can implement things and implement those small steps and see sustainable procurement working. I think that would be quite important.
Yeah, start with small steps. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Vaishali. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure our audience will be delighted to hear from you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sean, for your time today. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on sense and sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.